I want to start today with something that many of us at this point intuitively probably understand, and something that's also been made explicit by the FBI and other law enforcement agencies over the last year or two, which is that at this point in time for the United States, without saying anything about times past necessarily, right now, the U.S. is facing as way more domestic terror threats as foreign terror threats. There's a very interesting Newsweek article about this, which says the U.S. is facing far more domestic terror threats than those from international parties, according to the FBI. Timothy Langan, assistant director of the Bureau's counterterrorism division, told lawmakers Wednesday that the U.S. is approaching more than 2,700 domestic terrorism threats. The number of international terror threats is under 1,000. Langan also gave statistics on terrorism-related deaths in the U.S. from 2015 to 2020. There were 80 reported international terrorism-related deaths, compared with 83 deaths linked to domestic terrorism. Langan's testimony follows FBI Director Christopher Wray's statements to Congress earlier this month, when he said the number of domestic terrorism cases has exploded in the last year and a half. A recent AP poll found more Americans are concerned about threats from extremist groups based in the U.S. as opposed to those from other countries. 65% of U.S. adults report being extremely or very concerned about domestic group threats, compared with 50% feeling the same about foreign extremist groups. There's a couple things here. One is it's really common that people's fear of things is often out of line with the actual danger of that thing. We see this with vaccine stuff, right? There are lots of people who are afraid of COVID, but this movement of people afraid of the vaccine, when really it's COVID you should be much more afraid of, that would be one example. In general, people tend to worry much more about, for example, being the victims of a terrorist attack, despite it being insanely unlikely that any of us would ever be. Doesn't mean some people won't be, but statistically speaking, insanely unlikely, versus things we don't think much about, like getting in a car every day, which is actually a comparatively dangerous thing, given the number of people who die yearly from terrorism in the U.S. versus the number who die in car accidents, or being more afraid of flying than driving in a car, even though the driving in a car is far more dangerous. Okay, so that's one thing, that oftentimes, even though the domestic terror threat is a bigger threat, people think of the idea of often it's dangerous Muslims from the Middle East, or sometimes it would be brown immigrants from Latin America, or whatever the trope of the week, month, or year happens to be. But then number two, there are entire media apparatuses in the United States that are very similar to what we see in other countries radicalize people into what is often referred to in the U.S. as jihadist terror or Islamic or Islamist terror. We have the equivalent in the United States of these media outlets that spread hate and sow fear and radicalize people. And many Americans don't recognize them as being the sort of domestic equivalents of the stuff that we say, wow, how did these people end up getting radicalized into ISIS, for example? And you look at the media and the internet content. But then we wonder, how did so many people end up getting radicalized to the point where they rioted on January 6th, or they put pipe bombs in Washington, D.C., or whatever the case may be? And then you look at what we have happening on Facebook and OAN, Newsmax, to some degree, Fox News and Alex Jones and so many others. This stuff radicalizes people as well. And it should come as no surprise that when the rubber hits the road, the domestic terror is actually far more of a threat mathematically than the foreign terror. And yet another report from the FBI confirms exactly that. Now, if you think that although the number may be greater, it makes sense because, well, you're in the U.S., so the Americans are already here. That doesn't mean that they're more dangerous on average. There may be more of them. And, if it's 83 versus 80 deaths from terror, the fact that there are more threats doesn't mean that much. I would disagree. The fact that there are that many potential nodes of radicalism and terrorism domestically means that there's way more people who could be activated by the exact type of rhetoric that we've been fighting against. Let me know your thoughts. One of our sponsors is Aura. Think about all of your online accounts, finances, your devices. How are you protecting them? Hacking, data breaches, identity theft. These are bigger issues now than they've ever been before. Aura is a new type of security service. It protects your online data, your internet connection, your devices with one subscription. You'll be alerted to fraud and threats quickly, like if your online accounts or passwords were leaked, or if someone tried to open a bank account in your name. With an easy online dashboard and alert sent straight to your phone, Aura keeps you in control and guides you through solving any issues. All plans come with a $1 million identity theft insurance to help recover stolen funds. So if you want to secure your online presence from hackers and scammers, check out Aura. You'll get 40% off all plans when you go to aura.com/Pacman. The link is right underneath this video.